I thought I was just hosting a quiet family evening, coffee, leftover pie, the usual small talk. But when my cousin's boy lingered by the door, holding his coat like it weighed 100 pounds, he leaned in and whispered something that changed the way I saw him, and the way I saw myself. I didn't expect tears. I didn't expect truth. And I definitely didn't expect the kind of calm, respectful closeness that can only happen when two people choose honesty over pride. Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. It was late November, the kind of night where the wind makes the windows speak in soft taps. I was 48 then, living in a modest house that always smelled faintly of cinnamon, because I refused to let the holidays arrive without a little warmth to greet them. My cousin Denise had swung by with her son Marcus. I still called him her boy, even though he was grown, 24, broad-shouldered, and polite in that quiet way that makes you listen harder. He'd been away for work, and this was the first time I'd seen him in months. The evening was simple. Soup in deep bowls, old music low in the background, Denise laughing too loudly at her own stories. Marcus mostly smiled, nodded, and helped without being asked, carrying plates, refilling water, wiping the counter as if he'd been raised in my kitchen instead of hers. But I noticed things, the way women my age tend to notice. The little pause before he answered questions. The way his eyes drifted to the floor when someone teased him about big plans and settling down. The way his hands stayed busy, like stillness would invite thoughts he didn't want. When Denise finally checked her phone and announced they had to go, I walked them to the entryway. The hall light threw a soft gold over the coats hanging on hooks, mine, Denise's, and Marcus's heavy one, dark and neatly folded over his arm. Denise stepped outside first, calling over her shoulder, "Marcus, don't forget your scarf." He nodded, but he didn't follow. Not right away. He stood there in my doorway, holding his coat against his chest, fingers pressed into the fabric as if it could steady him. His face had that look people get when they've rehearsed something and still don't trust the words to behave. "Everything okay?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle. I didn't want to corner him. I just wanted him to know the door was open, in every sense. He swallowed, then gave a small, almost embarrassed laugh. "Auntie." "Well, you're not my aunt, but you know." "I know," I said, smiling. "You can call me whatever makes it easier." That's when he leaned in, not invading my space, just stepping closer the way someone does when what they're about to say deserves privacy. His voice dropped low enough that even the wind outside couldn't steal it. "I'm scared I'm becoming someone I don't recognize," he whispered, still gripping his coat, "and I don't know who to talk to without being judged." The words didn't come with drama. They came with honesty. And something in my chest shifted, like a clock finally striking the hour it had been holding back. I didn't rush him. I didn't tease him. I just nodded once, letting my face say, "I'm here. You're safe." "Do you want to sit for a minute?" I asked. He glanced toward the porch where Denise was searching for the keys, then back at me. His shoulders rose and fell in a slow breath, the kind you take when you've carried something alone for too long. "Just 1 minute," he said. And with that, I stepped aside and let him back into the warmth of my home, while the night waited quietly outside, and whatever Marcus was holding inside himself began to loosen, one careful word at a time. We sat at the small kitchen table, the one with the faint scratch marks from years of everyday living. I poured fresh coffee even though it was late, mostly to give my hands something to do. Marcus set his coat over the back of the chair, but kept one hand resting on it, as if letting go completely might send him running. Through the window, I could see Denise pacing near her car, still on her phone, distracted enough to give us the space we hadn't planned, but somehow needed. Marcus stared into his mug, watching the steam rise and vanish. "Everyone thinks I've got it figured out," he said quietly. "Strong job, good pay, no trouble. But I feel like I'm pretending, like I'm wearing someone else's life." I nodded slowly. Men his age rarely hear this said out loud without being told to toughen up. Men my age learned long ago that silence can be heavier than words. "When I was your age," I said, "I thought confusion meant failure. Took me decades to realize it usually means you're growing." He looked up at that, really looked at me, as if measuring whether I meant it or was just being kind. "I don't know who I'm supposed to be," he admitted. "Everyone's advice sounds loud, but none of it sounds right." I leaned back in my chair. "And maybe you don't need advice. Maybe you need permission." "Permission for what?" "To slow down, to question things, to not have a neat answer ready." He let out a breath that turned into a soft, surprised laugh. "No one's ever said that to me." We sat there in a comfortable pause. The clock above the sink ticked steadily, grounding the moment. I was aware of the years between us, but they didn't feel like a wall. They felt like a bridge, one built from shared mistakes, different decades, and the same quiet hopes. "I feel weak saying all this," he added, almost apologetically. "You're not weak," I said firmly, meeting his eyes. "You're honest. There's a difference." His shoulders relaxed a little, as if that distinction mattered more than he expected. Outside, Denise's car door finally closed, the engine humming faintly. Marcus glanced toward the window, then back to me. "Thank you for not brushing this off," he said. "I didn't plan to say anything. It just came out." "Sometimes truth waits for a safe place," I replied. "And sometimes it finds one when we least expect it." He picked up his coat again, folding it carefully over his arm, but this time it looked lighter. When he stood, he hesitated, not uncertain, just thoughtful. "I don't know what changes next," he said, "but I feel less alone walking back into the noise." "That's a good place to start," I told him. "You don't have to solve your whole life tonight." At the door, he paused once more, then offered a quiet, sincere smile, the kind that isn't about politeness, but relief. As he stepped out into the cold night, I stayed there for a moment, listening to the wind and the fading sound of the car. I didn't know then how deeply that whispered confession would stay with me, but I knew something important had begun, not between us, but within each of us. The days that followed settled back into their usual rhythm, but something inside me had shifted. I found myself thinking about Marcus more than I expected, not in a worrying way, but with a quiet awareness, the way you think about a sentence that keeps echoing long after it's spoken. His words hadn't been dramatic. They hadn't needed to be. They had been real, and real has weight. A week passed, then another. Winter leaned harder against the house, frosting the mornings and shortening the afternoons. I was folding laundry one evening when my phone buzzed. A simple message. "Hope it's okay to text. Just wanted to say thank you again." I smiled before I'd even realized it. I wrote back that of course it was okay, that I hoped he was doing well. The exchange could have ended there, and for a moment it did. But later that night, another message arrived, then another the next evening. Nothing heavy, just small check-ins. How work was going. A funny thing he noticed on the bus. A question about a book he remembered seeing on my shelf. What struck me wasn't the frequency. It was the tone. Careful, respectful, thoughtful. He wasn't leaning on me. He was reaching out, the way someone does when they finally trust that they won't be dismissed. One afternoon, he asked if I'd like to walk with him at the park near my house. Public. Simple. Clear. I appreciated that more than he probably knew. The park was nearly empty when we met, bare trees lining the path like quiet witnesses. He wore the same coat from that night, zipped up against the cold, hands tucked into the pockets. We walked side by side, leaving enough space between us that neither of us felt crowded. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told me after a while. "About permission." "And?" I asked. And I realized I've spent most of my life trying to be impressive instead of honest. I nodded. "That realization alone puts you ahead of where I was at your age." He smiled at that, then grew serious again. "Talking to you doesn't feel like being corrected. It feels like being heard." I stopped walking and turned to him, making sure my voice carried the truth of it. "That's because I'm not trying to shape you. I'm just listening." He met my gaze, and in that moment, I saw not a boy, not even just a young man, but a human being standing at the edge of himself, deciding whether to step forward or retreat. We resumed walking. Our conversation moved gently, touching on regrets, hopes, the quiet fear of choosing wrong paths. There was no rush, no pressure to arrive at a conclusion. Just two people sharing the kind of honesty that rarely finds daylight. When we reached the end of the path, he exhaled slowly. "I don't want to confuse things," he said carefully. "But this matters to me. This connection." "I understand," I replied. "And it matters because it's grounded in respect. That's what keeps it healthy." He nodded, relieved by the clarity instead of threatened by it. As we parted, I watched him walk away, his coat pulled tight, his steps steadier than before. I realized then that growth doesn't always come from grand gestures. Sometimes it comes from a quiet walk, a steady presence, and the courage to speak without hiding. That night, as I turned off the lights and let the house settle into silence, I felt a calm certainty. Whatever this was becoming, it wasn't about crossing lines. It was about understanding them and choosing deliberately to stand on the right side of ourselves. Time has a way of clarifying things when you let it move at its own pace. Winter slowly loosened its grip, and with it came longer days and a gentler light that filled my living room in the mornings. Marcus and I stayed in touch, but never in a way that felt hurried or demanding. Some weeks we spoke often, other times only briefly. What mattered was the steadiness of it, the understanding that neither of us was filling a void, but sharing space. One afternoon, months after that first night, he stopped by again. This time there was no tension at the door, no heavy pause. He carried his coat folded neatly over his arm, just like before, but his posture was different. Grounded, sure. "I wanted you to know," he said after we sat. "I made a change. I turned down a promotion that didn't feel right and moved to a different team. It scared me, but it feels honest." I felt a quiet pride, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. "That takes courage," I said, "especially when the world expects you to chase titles instead of peace." He nodded. "I wouldn't have done it if I hadn't learned that it's okay to question things." We talked for a while longer about family, about aging, about how life rarely turns out the way we imagine, but still finds ways to surprise us. There was warmth in the conversation, but also clarity. Whatever connection we shared had found its proper shape, one rooted in trust, not confusion. When it was time for him to leave, we stood again near the doorway. The same hallway, the same hooks. Yet everything felt different. He picked up his coat, paused, and smiled. "That night," he said, "I thought I was asking for help. I didn't realize I was learning how to listen to myself." "And I didn't realize," I replied softly, "how much wisdom can come from simply being present for someone." We didn't hug for long. We didn't need to. Some moments don't ask for more than acknowledgement. After he left, I closed the door and leaned against it for a second, listening to the quiet hum of the house. I thought about how unexpected connections can teach us the most, not because they cross boundaries, but because they honor them. Years later, that memory still stays with me, not as a dramatic turning point, but as a reminder. Growth can arrive in a whisper. Healing can happen in ordinary rooms. And sometimes, the most meaningful exchanges come when someone holds their coat, steadies their voice, and chooses honesty, while you choose to listen.